Welcome back to Visions. I'm Megan Searle, and our guests tonight are Jessie Taylor and Kurt Esser from the Justice Project. Welcome back. Thanks. Now, our first question on coming back is, how does the Justice Project differ from, let's say, something like Liberty Victoria?
Liberty Victoria is a very, very important organisation, but it doesn't regard its main reason for being as a campaign company. We regard ourselves as a campaign company. Our really important thing is to harness people's efforts, to focus them, to engage people on relevant human rights issues, and then really try to make a difference. And although there's a fair amount of overlap with organisations such as Liberty Victoria, they would regard themselves as a peak organisation for the expression of liberty. We regard ourselves as workers on the ground, trying to mobilise people to make a difference.
And so what is your stand on refugee law reform? Big question.
Yeah, it is. It has been a huge question, and it's evolved a lot over the last 12 months particularly. Before the federal election, we were campaigning for things like children out of immigration detention, the abolition of the Pacific Solution, all sorts of different changes to the legislation, particularly that to do with judicial review of decisions made by the Refugee Review Tribunal, conditions of different visas like the Bridging Visa E, which is hugely problematic, and the Temporary Protection Visa, which is also hugely problematic. In the past 12 months, there has been so much change in the refugee law. Not even so much with the legislation, but in the attitudes of the community and of the government, of the Department of Immigration, to its treatment of refugees and asylum seekers. So, in the first week of July, the last child was let out of an onshore immigration detention centre, which is so exciting.
It is.
There are still problems with kids being kept in community detention, but they're out of the centres, which we consider to be a big step.
How many children, like, I'm not sure if you've got these figures, but how many children were in, like, I'd say over the past 3 or 4 years?
Many hundreds.
Many hundreds,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, there have been a lot.
A lot.
And it's the only place in the history of Australia where there is a substantiated record of, pre-adolescent suicide attempts and things like that. So it's just been massively damaging to those kids who are still coping with the trauma even after being let out of detention. There's massive implications. So that was a huge priority for us. And we have seen in early this year the Cornelia Rao thing, and it's sort of thrown around that Cornelia Rao is the best thing that's ever happened for refugee law reform in Australia. Yeah. Suddenly everyone sort of went, whoa, something's going on here. And then we had that opened the door for the Petro Giorgio negotiations and the private members' bills, which have just softened up the attitudes of the community. Now, very often there's news in the media about, this particular success story of a refugee who's come and is studying now, or, is the lifeblood of a rural community, and these things that have just opened the doors or opened the gates for people to come to know refugees on a personal level, therefore completely changing their attitudes about the policies.
Yeah. Now, you talked before that you did a lot of work in terms of the campaigning or the helping in terms of getting the preference votes for the last election. Excuse me. What was your big win, or what was the big thing that you achieved through the project?
Well, it was interesting to see what happened. I mean, all members of the Justice Project were a little disheartened.
Election night was not a good one.
Election night was sad.
We were a bit sad.
Because after all, it showed that the Australian government had been lied to. Sorry, the Australian public had been lied to. And notwithstanding all of that, notwithstanding the Children Overboard affair, notwithstanding people's appreciation of appalling conditions in detention centres, they were still prepared to not only return the government, but to return the government with an increased majority. It was not an occasion for celebration for members of the Justice Project or for the cause of refugee law reform. However, as Jessie has said, through other major disasters, people have finally come to a realisation that there is really something very rotten that was happening in the Immigration Department, and it's very, very reassuring to see that the much heralded change of culture is actually slowly occurring within the immigration.
So what have you been
detention
doing
centres.
since the election? What does the Justice Project do now?
Well, our second project, as Jessie was saying before, was that we agreed to be a secretariat for all those concerned citizens who were in favour of having a Victorian-based Charter of Rights. We came to a very firm conclusion that the only way we could really move forward on human rights kinds of issues, especially such as refugee law reform, was by encouraging people to press ahead, state by state, for a Charter of Human Rights. We thought that a Charter of Human Rights was sadly lacking. It was a sad indictment about Australia's political and cultural development that we were the only Western country without a Charter of Rights, either state by state or federally. And the government opportunistically has utilised the fact that there's a void. They've been able to legislate, they've been able to stop the proper role of courts, they've been able to silence people who are in detention, they've been able to chop off the ability of people to utilise, for example, the habeas corpus remedy, which we all thought we had. It's now more honoured in the breach than the observance. So that state by state and also federally, it's been demonstrated time and again that the government opportunistically has legislated where there's a vacuum. We wanted to stem that. We wanted to have a piece of paper that all citizens could look at and say, well, I feel enfranchised. I feel I'm part of this. And it's very, very gratifying to see the Victorian government has proceeded with a very good and well-orchestrated public inquiry, a very welcoming public inquiry, where everyone was asked to put in submissions. People who were opposed to the idea of a Charter of Rights were equally encouraged to make their voices heard. But the result of it has been an extremely well-integrated and comprehensive public inquiry, which has led the chairman of the inquiry, Professor George Williams, to have a very well-informed report, and the report seems to have been given the Good Housekeeping seal of approval by the government of Victoria, and Mr Hulls is to be congratulated, and Premier Bracks is to be congratulated as well for having shepherded in what is a very, very important piece of social legislation, we believe.
Fantastic. And we'd like to talk more about that after the break. You're watching Visions. I'm Megan Searle, and we'll be back shortly.